So here's where we're going to be for the next week or two. Okay? Whitetails, ticks, mice, and Lyme disease. This is an ecological story. This is sort of a little ecological play, but it's one of those weird plays where we don't quite know all the pieces of the action, and we don't really quite have a resolution on it yet. I say it's in 4 chapters. We could also say an ecological play with 4 actors, but in reality, there's a pretty big cast to this. So we're going to start off by meeting the actors. Huh?
I've seen
The gang. So here are the first actors we're going to meet, the eastern white-tailed deer, Otocoilus virginianus. And then we have the white-footed or deer mouse. Okay? They're adorable. They're so stinking cute. If you like rodents. They've got these gigantic eyes and these big ears. They are so cute. And then there's the black-legged tick, about which no one has ever said they're so cute. Little 8-legged creepy crawly. And that one's got 8 legs. You can see it's got sort of a darker region up near the head, and then the body is a sort of a pretty reddish-brown, maroon, whatever. And then we have the one that nobody ever talks about. Somebody in here knows something about this. Borelli. We're kind of going from largest to smallest. And the smallest member of our little story here is Borrelia burgdorferi. Well, it's the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. So it is the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. And I was really surprised. Nobody in the other class said they knew that Lyme was a bacterial infection. Did you know that? Somebody did. Did you know it was a bacterial infection? What's the treatment for Lyme? Did you have it? Okay. Yeah, you're real familiar with it. From the inside. Treatment for Lyme is antibiotics. What do we give antibiotics for? You know this. We started the year here. Bacterial infections. Do we give them for viruses? No. Heck no! Sorry. I startled myself, actually. No, it's a bacterial infection, and it's caused by this particular bacteria. And we will talk more about what a weird little bacteria this is, actually. So, we're going to start off focusing on this one. The eastern whitetail. And I actually got really smart, and I tried to put all your vocabulary words in bold in these notes. So, how cool is that? I can't believe I was actually that clever. I'm usually not that clever. But the eastern whitetail is Ohio's largest herbivore. What's an herbivore?
Plant eater.
Plant eater, vegetarian. Yep. However, that being said, they are also incredibly flexible. They're very, very adaptable. I have to tell this story because I find it hilarious. Years ago, when we used to do the Carnegie trip, I would take our Beaver local students to an Indian buffet. All-you-can-eat Indian buffet. It was like $8.99, and I loved this place. And they had rice and bread, and then they would have like 10 or 12 different Indian dishes, curries, and sometimes they'd have goat, and sometimes they'd have like tandoori chicken, and they'd have, oh my gosh, all kinds of wonderful stuff with spices that you just don't taste outside of those kind of places. And we would pack up our 40 or so sophomores and hike them down to the Indian restaurant. And I would have a few people every year who were like, I'm just going to eat rice. It's all too weird for me. I'm just going to eat rice. And then I had Ben. And this was like 10 years ago. You don't know him. And I would be surprised if Ben had gotten, more than about 15 miles from Rogers, Ohio, or wherever. I don't know where he lived. I don't remember. Lisbon, in his life. He just hadn't traveled a whole lot. He hadn't had a wide selection of experiences. I mean, he had never been to Pittsburgh. And we take him to the museum, and we take him to the restaurant, and the whole way he kept going, I can't wait. I love food. Ben, have you ever had Indian food? Nope. okay, it's different. It's not, I love food. I said, okay, Ben, it's not anything you've ever tried. I don't care. He ate his way through the whole buffet. He tried every single thing on the buffet. And there were a few things about which he said, nah, I didn't like that. That was good. Went back 4 times. And I said, so you liked it all? No, but I'd eat it all. Okay. He really liked food. He wasn't all that picky. Like if you set it down in front of him and it didn't bite back, he would eat it. That's kind of how deer are, except with vegetables. So they're plant eaters broadly, but they are so adaptable. They'll eat really just about any kind of plant material you put in front of them. Baby trees, sure. Raspberries, yep. Clover, oh, delightful. A field full of soybeans, absolutely. Acorns, yes, you name it. They'll eat it. They're very, very adaptable, and that gives them a huge advantage. They're what we call a generalist species. So I talk about my former student because he was very much a generalist in terms of food. There really wasn't anything he wouldn't eat. Where my students who said, like, I'm just going to eat the rice, they're pretty specialized. Like, they don't like, I mean, I literally had one person who said to me, like, I only eat 5 things. Okay. And it was like bread, potatoes, corn, maybe like chicken. Yeah, I mean, it was really like, and they didn't eat any spices. Okay. So that's a generalist. A generalist is someone who is really flexible in their requirements, and we'll talk more about this when we get further into ecology. But deer are sort of the first generalist species we're going to meet. We sometimes call them a weed species because they thrive just about anywhere. There have even, and this is really interesting, it says able to eat almost any vegetation. Somebody would have to find the reference here. But I seem to recall that I found a reference that said deer have even been observed to eat mice, which I found rather shocking. Not as a normal part of their diet, but that if they were hungry enough, they would. And they're not going to go digging for grubs or anything, but they are a generalist. Now, this is an interesting one. When I learned about deer, anything that I ever learned about deer growing up was that they were strictly crepuscular. So crepuscular is dawn and dusk active, so they're the creatures of the changing light, if you want to make it sound all romantic and poetic. Some of this information comes out of that Citizen Deer Watch program, the Whitetail Watch. Deer are actually active 24 hours a day. They have periods of inactivity and periods of activity. They are most active dawn and dusk, but they actually have a 24-hour activity cycle. The other thing that a lot of people are shocked by is that they are found in every county in Ohio, including the most urbanized counties in Ohio. You go into downtown Cleveland, you go look in the parks and the cemeteries, you'll find deer. You go down into downtown Columbus, any place I went to Columbus last year for this little training, and I walk in the morning. I walk like a mile and a half every morning before school. And so I'm down in this like urban area. I'm in this hotel, and I'm thinking, I want to go walk with trees. And sure enough, I found this little tiny park along the creek. There was a creek that ran right through the city, and most of the way along that little creek, they had a little walking trail. And the whole park was probably like 50 feet wide. It was probably 25 feet on either side of the creek. Guess what? Deer will use that. They're adaptable. If you've gone out and looked where our buses pull in, there's about a 4-foot strip of trees there. In an urban area, a little vegetated strip like that is someplace that deer will travel. They'll use that. They're super adaptable. Some of you were in Pittsburgh with us. There are several suburbs of Pittsburgh that are pretty urban that are having huge problems with enormous deer populations. And they tend to concentrate in the parks. They tend to kind of eat it down to the ground. Youngstown had that issue a few years ago, and they actually were having archers come in and do archery in the park during a limited span. So, deer are really adaptable. Now, that said, they are also pest-ridden. Who here has butchered a deer? Okay. Have you ever found one with parasites? You ever seen parasites? Okay. They are hugely susceptible to parasites. Every single wild thing is out there for all the parasites in the world. And Deer will get fleas and ticks. They get bitten by flies all season. They get bot flies. Who knows what a bot fly is? Sit up. Come on, Austin. We're going to talk about pus and worms. Okay, you ever get bot flies on your cows?
Yeah.
Oh, I used to get bot flies on my barn cats all the time. Who knows what a bot fly is? Okay, so it's a little fly and it lands on skin and it injects its eggs down into the muscle. For some reason this creeps people out. And then those eggs hatch and these little worms are in the little you knew I was going to do it. These little tiny worms are in this little tiny hole, and there's a little bit of pus out at the hole, and it's like this little open hole. And eventually the worms grow up and they come out of the hole and turn into flies, and then the hole heals over. It's not that bad. My barn cats used to get them all the time. And if you are feeling really brave, and if you're the sort of person who likes this kind of thing, I dare you. Go to, for once I didn't pick on you, go to YouTube and search botfly extraction. You will be richly rewarded, let me tell you. There are a lot of videos on botfly. Oh, you're all doing it right now. See, that'll wake you up. Deer get botflies. Deer get all sorts of parasitic worms. They have a hard time. So let's return from the botflies, come back from the botflies, come back. Let's talk a little bit about range and abundance for deer. So these are two words that we see in an ecological context a lot, and range is where the species is at. Where the species is. Abundance is basically how common the species is. I guess I could, whoops. I guess I could, that didn't work either. Okay, well, never mind. Okay, and if we blow up this little map, hey, guess what? That's Ohio. And this is one of the distribution and range maps that Division of Wildlife publishes, and they publish these for probably 20 or 30 Ohio mammal species. So the areas, the counties that are darkest, which is all these, have the highest populations of deer. They have lots of deer. Who can find Columbiana County on a map of the state of Ohio? Oh, please tell me you can. Thank God. This one, folks, that's us right there. We've got that little bump out around Salem because we stole Salem from Mahoning County or something. I don't know. So yeah, we've got the little like keyed in part there, and we're right here at the West Virginia border. So we're three states come together. That's us. We've got a pretty high deer population, along with Jefferson County, and let's see if I can get these, Guernsey or Belmont, I get them confused. Anyway, all these southeast counties have got pretty high deer populations. Deer are very common. Now, if you go up to Cedar Point, you go up to Sandusky and Toledo, and even the farm country out there, which is very different than our kind of farm country, they don't have as high a deer population as we do. By Ohio standards, they actually have a pretty low population. Deer are not nearly as abundant up there. The habitat is not as good. Now, if we look at the national picture, first off, I want you to notice that whitetails are not found in the West, typically. There are a few little pockets. There's another species of deer, the mule deer, which is another, I believe it's another Odocoilus species, that's found out west. Whitetails are an eastern species. And if you look at Ohio on this, you can see that same pattern where the southeast part of the state has got higher populations than the northeast. But if you look at West Virginia, just take a look at West Virginia for a second. Holy smokes, that's like a plague of locusts that will eat the clothes on your body and the handles on your tools and everything everywhere. It's crazy. And southwestern Pennsylvania is about the same. They actually do have higher populations of deer as we cross into western Pennsylvania than we do in Ohio. They're pretty abundant, though. Even in, we'll talk about, well, we'll talk about how that has changed over the years and where you think it's at now. But, currently in Ohio, we've got a pretty good deer population. And Division of Wildlife, which publishes this map, uses hunting information and other survey information to figure out how to set bag limits. So where would you expect there to be a higher bag limit in Ohio? These counties or these counties? The darker ones, yeah. And I think we were trying to figure out in the last class, is the bag limit this year 6? If you take everything you can get. So antlerless, antlered, archery, gun, youth gun, muzzle loader, like if you do everything. I know there was one period, at least, we were in the old building, I'd say like 2011, 2012, where if you took advantage of every single tag you could possibly get, you could get 6 deer if you were under 18, because that included like youth gun and antlered, antlerless, archery, muzzle loader, and because we've got a big deer population. I don't know what the limit is this year, but somebody said they thought it was 5 if you took a chance, every single chance you could. So, okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about history. And I'm going to share with you, this is a gift from my father to you. So, my dad had a little game, and we played it from the time I was a little kid. And we played it right up until his death. And I now kind of play it with my daughter. And the game is this. You can go anywhere in the history of Earth. You got 4.6 billion years to choose from. Any place, any time. You want to go to Paris in the 20s? Fine. You get 3 picks. You can't interact in any way. You're totally safe. You can't be hurt. You're an observer only. Where do you want to go? Don't answer. I want you to think about this for the entire rest of your life. One of my dad's was always, I want to see the pyramids built. I want to see how they really did it. It's not a bad one. One of my personal favorites, I want to see this piece of ground. I want to see Columbiana County, Ohio, what's now Columbiana County, Ohio, 1,000 years ago. I want to see this place wild. I want to see this place before European contact. It's always been one of my favorite thoughts. Like, I want to walk this ground, but before it got tamed. So, the question I have for you is, what would that look like? And I guess I'm giving you a pretty good clue here. What would that look like? Bunch of trees. So we're going to do this. 1753, 1803, 1853, 1903, 1953, 2003. So we'll start off with that 1753. What did Ohio look like? It was heavy woodland, and it's not even just mostly woodland. There's literally like no space in the forest. It is so, whoops, didn't mean to do that. It is so heavily wooded that early travelers to the Ohio Territory talked about how oppressive the forests were. It was so dark. It was dark at midday because the trees were so heavy. These are big trees. These are huge, deep forests with no end in sight. And, in 1753, were there Europeans in this area? Were there Europeans in what became Ohio? There were a few. There were French trappers. There were scouts. But we didn't have settlers. We didn't have people building cabins and farming crops. So here's the thing that now, here's my next question for you. Do you think there are a lot of deer here in 1753? Okay. Now something happens. When do you guys know when we start to see European settlement? 1790s, basically. We start to really, because 1803 Ohio has enough people to apply for statehood. So prior to, 1790, let's say, Ohio was mostly natives. It was what? Wyandotte, Onondaga, don't OD, Delaware, Onondaga, something, Wyandotte, Miami, something, Shawnee. There were seven tribes found in Ohio, 7 native nations that were found in this territory. So by the 1790s, we've got heavy European settlement coming in. Do you know what happens between 1790 and 1803? You want to take a guess? Here, I'll show you. There, that's what happens. Ohio lost 90% of its trees in 10 years. And these were trees that were like 10 feet across. These were trees that like 6 of us could not reach around. This was old growth forest. And in about 10 years, European settlers... Well, I mean, here's the thing. You got babies to feed, and you got a life to make, and the only way to do that is with crops. And you can't grow crops in a forest. And so they saw these trees as something to be killed. It's a different perspective. They were fighting the forest. They were fighting it back. And they, so it's you and me and a handsaw. How long do you think it's going to take to cut through a tree that's 10 feet? Weeks. I mean, I don't know, probably not. But several days of continuous sawing. So they would girdle the trees. They would cut all the bark off in a 1-foot strip around the base of the trees and kill the trees standing. Some of those trees were literally just sort of burned. I mean, it was pretty brutal. But they cleared Ohio. They took out 90% of the forests in a course of about 10, 15 years. Changed things a little bit, don't you think? So what we're going to talk about is what happened, and we'll talk about this tomorrow, with deer populations. Let's see, can I draw a decent deer? Probably not. It's going to look more like a startled fox. Oh yeah, that's terrible. There's the whitetail. That is the worst deer I have ever seen. That is terrible. We're going to talk about them and what happens to their populations in that 200 years. Have a good night.